Hello, everyone. This is Steve Butler, CEO of GoDocs, and the moderator for today's webinar. I want to thank everyone for attending the next 30 minutes. I think it'll be a very informative session for everyone. This webinar is going to be run as a live panel discussion with true experts on the LIBOR to SOFR topic. The webinar will be recorded and made available at godocs.com. Our expert panelists are going to hit the highlights on a pretty deep topic, but also all attendees will be receiving a PowerPoint presentation that fully covers the research and conclusions made on this topic. If we have time, we'll take questions or comments from the audience. You can send me your questions during the webinar through the chat mechanism. I'd like to ask everyone to please stay on mute. Before we begin, I'd like to tell a little bit about myself and the panelists that we have today. First, I joined GoDocs as CEO on July 1st, and have had a long career as an entrepreneur and CEO of software companies that provide business process automation. Most recently, I founded an AI company that built an automation platform for the residential mortgage industry that our largest customer, Guaranteed Rate, acquired. I'm super excited to be now involved in the commercial side of the business, where I see significant lag behind the residential mortgage business in terms of use of digital automation. GoDocs is a key digital automation platform that will help the change needed to dramatically drive down costs and speed of the lending process for both lenders and borrowers. Gary Highland is founder and president of GoDocs and a prominent commercial real estate finance attorney and document automation expert. Since founding GoDocs in 1997, Gary has grown the company into a fintech powerhouse that processes documents over 2 billion in loans per month. Ren Hayhurst is general counsel of GoDocs and a recognized expert in the field of commercial finance. He has represented many of the nation's leading banks, credit unions, and private lenders. Ren was a senior partner at Bryan Cave Leitner Paisner, one of the largest international law firms, for more than 30 years. So let's begin our questions to the panel. The first question will be to Gary Highland. And Gary, I'd like to ask you, can you give us an overview of how we got to where we are today with regard to the LIBOR to SOFR transition?
Sure, Steve. Back in 2012, a scandal came out about LIBOR, that the banks were manipulating the rates, reporting false information to have them make money in these overnight transactions. So once that came out, LIBOR was going to be discontinued, and the search began for an alternative index to replace LIBOR. And there's been different ones that have been published out there, but the lending world, and definitely the commercial real estate lending world, seems to have settled on the secured overnight financing rate, SOFR, which was selected by the Federal Reserve Board's Alternative Reference Rate Committee, the ARRC, to be the preferred LIBOR replacement index. And SOFR is based on the overnight rate for US dollar Treasury repo market, which is the largest rates market in the world. So in addition to the daily SOFR rates, the ARRC's transition plan included the development of various SOFR indices. So if you want to hit the next slide, Steve, that'd be great. Yeah, so until very recently, the Fed published compounded averages, like a backward-looking compounded average over rolling 30, 90-day or 180-day periods. The Reference Rate Committee's transition plan always included the development of forward-looking term SOFR rates that are equivalent to LIBOR. But pending the release of term SOFR, many banks have elected to utilize, well, the ones that have switched SOFR are utilizing one of the compounded SOFR indices, most commonly the 30-day compounded SOFR, and many of the lenders such as Fannie and Freddie and others are really looking forward to the release of the Term SOFR index. So they have some procedures that are really complex in terms of documentation for switching to Term SOFR once it becomes available. And so that takes us up to very recently.
Great, thank you, Gary. You know, I'd like to ask you a follow-up question on this. You know, you've taken us up to around July 29th of this year. I'd like to ask you, you know, what's today's status of SOFR? What's happened since then?
Well, good news is that in late July, the Alternative Reference Rate Committee formally recommended Term SOFR rates. It's published by a different organization, but that it is now the official Term SOFR rates. These are forward-looking rates equivalent to LIBOR. They're 1 month, 3 month, and 6 month. And by the end of this year, we're going to have a 1-year SOFR. So lenders who sell to Fannie or Freddie right now, we don't even have Term SOFR notes for them. So they're sticking right now, but I'm sure they'll be changing very soon to publishing a Term SOFR rate. But the lenders such as Fannie and Freddie who have made these two-step loans, now that Term SOFR is out there, they're now in a position to switch their index over to Term SOFR once it becomes administratively feasible.
Great. Thanks, Gary. Thanks for bringing us up to date. I want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, please use the chat and we'll take them at the end of the webinar. So Gary, looking forward now, what are the key issues that lenders need to grapple with as they transition from LIBOR to Term SOFR?
Sure. So I think the one that you're reading a lot about, and it's something that's obviously lenders need to grapple with, is the fact that over time, looking back historically, the ARRC has computed differences between LIBOR and Term SOFR, and they've actually published what the spread difference is. I mean, SOFR is basically lower than LIBOR across the board, and for 6-month Term SOFR, which is one of the most commonly used indices in the real estate, commercial real estate, the long-term spread between SOFR and LIBOR is about 43 basis points, or 4.3%, so lower than LIBOR. But there's a differential between the historical spread of 43 basis points and what's happening right now. With today's compressed rates, I mean, they're basically all very close to zero. The spread between 6-month Term SOFR and 6-month LIBOR is only about 10 basis points. So it's the difference between the current versus the historical spread between LIBOR and SOFR that makes the pricing a bit of a conundrum right now. So I think I've got some options here on this slide here. And really they just represent the two extremes plus a suggested compromise. So if you were to make a LIBOR, a Term SOFR based loan now, 6-month Term SOFR, and you're going to want to increase the spread so that your yield is equivalent of the difference between LIBOR and SOFR. So if you were to make a spread adjustment right now, it would only be 10 basis points to get to the, make it an equivalent right now to a LIBOR start rate. The problem with that is that over time, the spread difference is likely to, on average, go back up to the 43 basis points. So that will keep, if you only price a 10 basis point spread, then that'll make the that'll make the borrower very happy. They've got a happy face on, but the lender is looking down the road and seeing that that's likely to result in a lower yield for them. So scenario two makes the most sense for, the scenario two makes the most economic sense for the lender, and that would be to adjust the margin, increasing the margin by 43 bips over what it would be on a LIBOR-based loan, and this is going to result in, over time, the rate being equivalent to LIBOR. But for the borrower, it's going to result in a higher rate right now to start. So the lender, this is a good result for the lender, not so much for the borrower. And I think that what the consensus, or at least the discussions that I'm hearing now, is more like scenario three, where we have a start rate based on the current spread. So and this primarily makes sense in the context of a hybrid loan, which is fixed for a period of time and then begins to adjust. So you can give the borrower, if you will, a teaser rate, and yet adjust the margin for the full 43 basis points. And so over, I think you could argue over time to the borrower that this is over time. You're getting a LIBOR equivalent rate now, and over time you will still be getting a LIBOR equivalent rate as the spread normalizes.
Great. Thanks, Gary. I mean, there's obviously a lot to digest here, and I'm sure the overview you provided will be helpful for lenders in understanding, what their options are and the implication of the recent announcement of Term SOFR. But I'd like to now turn our focus here to what we do at GoDocs, which is, of course, closing loan documentation. And I'd like to ask GoDocs General Counsel some really critical questions. I mean, Ren Hayhurst, ignoring existing LIBOR-based loans already on the books, can you address how lenders have adapted to SOFR thus far, what they need to do now with existing SOFR-based loans, and what do you expect lenders to do going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So at present, this slide right here kind of shows you the conundrum of all the different options that are available and all of the different new definitions and complex terms that are involved in switching over to this new index. But to really distill it down, in the fall of 2020, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac took the lead in moving to SOFR. And their approach, which was a creative and a forward-looking approach, was to take the existing Fed rate for the 30, 90, or 180-day backward-looking or compounded SOFR, which is what we refer to it as, and use that as their rate at the then current time, fall of 2020, and they continue to use that to this day. However, knowing that Term SOFR was coming in the future, they did two very thoughtful things. One is that they provided the ability to transition to Term SOFR when it both became available and it became administratively and market ready for them to convert over. More importantly, they also provided the rate to not only replace the index, but also make any of the types of margin adjustments that Gary just described economically. And so they created this two-stage approach, and several lenders followed their lead and built in this two-stage approach. Right now, as we've mentioned, there is a published Term SOFR rate. However, it is still relatively new. As Gary indicated, historically, there's a spread differential that is significant. However, in this current market, that is much less so. There's also a question of how Term SOFR is going to react in the market to liquidity or illiquidity in the market. So some lenders are choosing to stick with just a compounded SOFR as their rate going forward, and they understand that it is backwards looking. They understand that it doesn't really act as a complete equivalent to the forward-looking LIBOR, but they've determined and priced it in a way that it makes sense. Other lenders are eager to jump straight into a pure LIBOR alternative, which is just term SOFR only. And in that case, there is some struggle as to how to correctly price this so you allocate the risk appropriately. Lenders do not want to overprice so that they drive themselves out of the market. However, they do not want to accept the complete risk that is out there if they underprice this particular product. So because of that, there are really kind of three different approaches. One is following the Fannie Freddie approach and taking the current established kind of market accepted compounded SOFR alternative and giving the lender the right then to transition when they're confident in term SOFR, they're confident in their administrative ability to price that and to make it make sense in the market, and then at that time be able to have a conversion. Whereas other lenders are saying, you know what, let's just go ahead and stick with compounded SOFR. That works for us. It's going to be a rate that's going to be published, even though term SOFR is out there, and we're comfortable with that. And then finally, there are those who really want that LIBOR alternative right here, right now. So those are really the three questions that lenders are asking themselves, and those are the three approaches that we are seeing in the market.
Great, thank you, Ren. But now let's talk a little bit about existing LIBOR loans that are on the books and what options lenders might have to deal with those.
That's a good question and a good issue, Steve, because historically, particularly knowing that LIBOR would eventually go away, and now we have that witching hour, which is December 31, 2021. LIBOR loans have historically now for the last decade anticipated that there would have to be a replacement index. And the standard replacement index has been to simply say that when there's a substantial equivalent, the lender will have the option to determine what that is, give notice to their borrower, and then make the transition to that replacement index. At the time, that made a lot of sense. And so a lot of loans are on the books for 10, 20, 30-year terms even, which are based on a LIBOR rate that have the ability to replace that index. However, as Gary has shown, the new alternative, the market replacement index that ARC has provided, SOFR, is going to behave a little bit differently. And historically, it is going to be less than LIBOR. So a lender who simply swaps out LIBOR for SOFR is going to be really taking the entire risk of the marketplace and putting themselves at a position where maybe as much as half a percentage point or 50 basis points, they may be losing in terms of their rate of return. So one thing that lenders can do if they have long-term LIBOR loans on their books is to provide for what we are using is a side letter agreement to modify that note to indicate that there is going to be a future transition to SOFR. So defining that replacement index, which is important in the marketplace. In connection with that, we are recommending and have developed that side letter agreement to also give the right for the lender to adjust the margin so that they can truly have a substantial equivalent to LIBOR. So I think the first step, or option number one, that we would recommend is that if you have an existing LIBOR loan, look at the replacement index language. It is likely that people are following what was the industry standard. And while there's a right to replace that index, there really isn't a right to kind of true up with a readjustment to the margin. And so now is the time before LIBOR goes away and a transition is really mandated for a lender, to go ahead and add in that ability to true up by making adjustments to the margin. So Steve, to your first question, I would say that this is really paramount right now in terms of planning for LIBOR going away, is to assess what you have and get on top of it and ahead of it, and provide for this type of transition to SOFR. For existing loans, I think there are really three options that we have. And I've talked about it a little bit, but maybe in some more detail. Number one would be to follow the Fannie-Freddie model. However, Fannie-Freddie created language that was robust. However, it anticipated a term SOFR rate that was neither published when the language was created, nor really had a publishing source to go to. So one option is to follow that model. And if a lender wanted to hedge their bet, they could adopt an existing compounded SOFR rate today. They could use that rate as long as that made sense for them in a market sense and in an administrative and competitive sense. And once term SOFR has really kind of established itself and really made it clear what that BIP differential would be, is it going to be 10 basis points? Is it going to be 43? Is it going to be something different than that? As the market matures and we have really some historical data, then being permitted, not required, but permitted to make that transition to a term SOFR, and both replace the compounded SOFR with term, make any adjustments in the margin as that conversion takes place. And most importantly, Steve, I would say that the language that we recommend and have developed is to allow that transition event to be at the election of the lender. So theoretically, Steve, it's possible that a loan with the two-step process could stay in a compounded SOFR for quite a bit of time, perhaps even the entire term of the loan, depending on what that was. But the option would always be there for the lender to switch over once they feel like term SOFR is stable and market established and would be something that makes sense for them and for their borrowers. Because remember, this marketplace depends on lenders and borrowers working together. And so you want to create that flexibility so that can happen. Other options would be, and we have several customers that are doing this, where they like the compounded SOFR. They have seen that it's worked for them for 2021. A lot of them have followed Fannie Mae in terms of establishing right now use of compounded SOFR, and they found that for the last 6, 9, even close to 12 months now, the compounded SOFR works pretty well for them and their customers and their borrowers. So they're using that rate, and there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you understand that this is a backwards-looking rate and not a forwards-looking rate. So there is some risk as the rate market is changing by using that. You'll tend to be lagging the market, whether it's 30-day lag, whether it's a 90-day lag, or as much as a 180-day lag. As long as you work that into your pricing and your economic models for your rate of return, using a compounded SOFR would be just fine. The final option, Steve, would be to go right now into term SOFR. And Gary's identified the risk very well, and that's all going to be in pricing. It's not going to be in the index. The index is being published by an established source. The index is going to be directed by algorithms and proper mechanics that hopefully are going to avoid any of the controversy or corruption that came up with LIBOR. So going to a term SOFR right now would be an absolutely acceptable option, as long as a lender was very mindful to the pricing risks and attended to those in a way that made economic sense, again, for them and their borrower base. So those are the four options we see right now. One is dealing with existing products on the book. The other three are making loans really from this day forward.
Great. Ren, thank you very much. As we told everyone, this is a pretty deep subject. The document that we'll send everybody will really reinforce what you've heard today from the panelists and give you a lot more of the information you need. I do want to we have time for taking one question. Thank you all for sending questions through chat. One question, and I guess I'll give you this, Ren, is that, what specific documents in the closing package will need new SOFR language?
Good question, Steve. Fortunately, if you think of a traditional package, you're going to have your loan agreement, which is going to set almost all of your business terms. You're going to have your note, which establishes the debt and the repayment terms. And it's important to note, Steve, that when a lender is enforcing their debt in a court of law, they are going to be enforcing the note. So the note is going to contain all of the payment terms. What is the index? How is it determined? What is the margin? How is that applied? What is an interest-only period, an amortization period, et cetera? So the good news is the only document you need to address when you're talking about SOFR will be the note. It does not need to be included in the loan agreement. It could. Our recommendation is don't do that, because if you're standing before a judge, you want one piece of paper in front of you, and that's going to be your note. And that note is going to have all your SOFR provisions. It's going to have all of your repayment provisions, and that is the document that you technically sue on. So from that perspective, we recommend it not be in a deed of trust or mortgage. That is a publicly recorded document. Lenders do not want to give away their pricing in a deed of trust, nor do you want to bury it in a loan agreement. Put it in your note, keep it in your note, and that way you have the right instrument to be able to enforce it, and you have the right instrument to articulate all the necessary terms with your borrower.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I've got some more good news to share with everybody, and that is that GoDocs has a fully automated Term SOFR solution in its closing document package. So all of this complexity that was described here today, with all the options that you have for the different indexes, moving right to Term SOFR, all of that has been automated in the GoDocs solution. We're working with many lenders on hundreds of loans today. They're already using this language and documenting their loans going forward. And we're also working with many lenders on their existing LIBOR loans to provide an automated migration path. Let me just give you a little overview as we close this webinar on who GoDocs is. First of all, we have this brilliantly simple solution for automated closing document generation. It's full SaaS, it's pay-as-you-go pricing, there are no setup charges. You pay only when you order loans. It's incredibly easy to use. We like to say if you order plane tickets, you can order documents on GoDocs. The documents are instantaneous. All of that sophistication that we just heard in this webinar, all of that has been encapsulated into the solution. So you get very sophisticated documents, but instantly when you go online to the SaaS solution. All of our support is onshore. Besides the panelists you have here, where it's backed up by an attorney staff and a large paralegal staff, so that you get just support when you need it, and it's expert support. And we handle all manner of commercial real estate, apartments, 1 to 4 apartments, multifamily, any type of commercial real estate is handled automatically by the GoDocs solution. And we've got a proven track record today. 20% of the top lenders are using GoDocs. GoDocs documents over $2 billion in loan value per month. We've been in business since 1997, and we have many of the top lenders and banks, credit unions, and private lenders that are using our solution. And we're rapidly replacing legacy solutions. If you've got solutions today which are on-premise, you maintain them in a data center, you get support offshore, which is problematic. You've got a trained specialist to use the solution. Those are the reasons to move over to GoDocs and why we're seeing so much movement from the legacy solutions to the GoDocs SaaS solution. So I'd like to invite all of you to schedule a live discussion with our panelists, myself, or schedule a demo at godocs.com. Here is our information on how to contact us directly. Again, I want to thank everyone for your attendance at today's webinar and your questions. We'll send all the materials to you shortly, including answers to your questions. This is the close of the webinar. Thank you all for attending.